Welcome to my channel, The Divine Treasure, an audiobook by Emmet Fox.
Do not flaunt your generosity before others, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, in order to be praised by the people. Truly I tell you, they have already received their reward. But when you give alms to someone, let your left hand not know what your right hand is doing, so that your generosity may be in secret, and your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you in public. And when thou prayest, be not as the hypocrites, for they love to pray in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, standing, to be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their hire. But as for you, when you pray, go into your chamber and shut your door. Pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you in public. And when you pray, do not be long-winded like the worldly, who think that by their talk they will be heard. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. Matthew 6. The heart of this section of the sermon is contained in verses 6 and 7, particularly the clause, "Pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you in public." The essential factor in the teaching of Jesus Christ is the doctrine of the secret place, and its importance as the controlling center of the kingdom. Man is the ruler of a kingdom, although in most cases, he does not know it. Said kingdom is nothing less than the world, of his own life and experience. The Bible is full of stories of kings and their kingdoms, of wise kings and foolish kings, of wicked kings and righteous kings, of victorious kings and defeated kings, of the rise and fall of kingdoms from all kinds of causes. Jesus, in his parabolic teaching, will often take the same idea and use it as a simile. There was a great king, he often begins. Each of these kings represents all men, studied in the various aspects of their mental outlook. The book of the Bible is the book of all men. It is first and foremost a metaphysical textbook, a manual of the development of the soul. And everything in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is really concerned with that development, that is, the spiritual awakening of the individual. All problems are analyzed from every possible angle, and the fundamental lessons of spiritual truth are presented in all sorts of different ways. All to meet every condition and every need, and almost every mood of human nature. Sometimes you are a king, sometimes a fisherman, sometimes a gardener, a weaver, a potter, a merchant, a high priest, a captain of armies, or a beggar. The Sermon on the Mount regards you as a king, the absolute ruler of his own kingdom, for this, after all, is the most complete of all similes. If you know the truth of being, you are as a literal fact, and not merely in a rhetorical sense, the absolute monarch of your own life. You create your own conditions, and you can unmake them. You make and unmake your own health. You attract to yourself certain kinds of people and certain conditions, and repel others. You attract wealth or poverty, peace of mind or fear, according to the way you rule your kingdom. Naturally, the world does not know this. It assumes that the conditions of one's life are largely made by external circumstances, and by other people. The world believes that one is exposed at all times to unforeseen accidents and released of one kind or another, which can be a serious inconvenience, or even completely ruin your life plan. However, the truth of being is just the opposite of all this, and since humanity has almost always believed in the false version, it cannot surprise us that history has been so full of mistakes, suffering and trouble. The effort to conduct any business, on the basis of false principles, or to make a reasoning, from a series of erroneous premises, can be nothing but misfortune and confusion. And this is naturally what has happened. People have suffered because they have been deceived, about the nature of life and of themselves, and that is why Jesus, the Savior of the world, said, "Know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That is why he dedicated the years of his public life, to teach and explain the truth, to tell us about God and man, and to instruct us on how to live. If it is true as it is, that our difficulties arise from our own erroneous thinking, in the present and in the past, one may well ask, considering the sublime level of consciousness to which Jesus had reached. Why did he have to face difficulties from time to time, in particular, his terrible conflict with fear in Gethsemane, and his death on the cross? The case of Jesus was very different from that of any other person, because he suffered, not because of his own wrong thinking, but because of ours. Thanks to his high degree of understanding, he could have easily walked away and transcended without any suffering, as for example, Moses and Elijah had done. But he voluntarily chose to undertake his terrible task to help mankind, and for this reason he is rightly called the Savior of the world. Let us now consider this realm a little more in detail, and we shall find that the king's palace, the governing office, so to speak, is nothing less than your own consciousness, your own mentality. It is your own private cabinet, and the affairs transacted there are the swirl of thoughts, which are continually passing through your mind. The psalmist calls it the secret place of the Most High, and it is secret, because no one but you knows what goes on there. There is privacy and there is dominion. You have the power to harbor whatever thoughts you want. You can choose which thoughts you will accept, and which you will reject. You are the master there. Whatever thoughts you choose to dwell on, will express themselves in the outer physical world, as things and events. Your choice is to think them, or not to think them in the first place. If you don't want to have to deal in the near future, with certain consequences, what you have to do, is to refrain from thinking them. If you don't want an engine to start, you don't open the valve. If you don't want an alarm to sound, you don't push the button. And so, if you really understand this fundamental principle, from now on you will watch your habitual thinking, with the utmost care. Since it is true, that the kind of thoughts you keep in consciousness, the secret place, are going to express themselves in the present, in your outer life, in your body and in your affairs. You will no longer think about holding inharmonious thoughts. Remember, whatever the mind dwells on will sooner or later enter into your experience. It does not mean at all that the particular thing you are thinking about is exactly what will happen, although sometimes it does. For example, if you think a lot about illness, you tend to undermine your health. If you think a lot about poverty and depression, you tend to attract poverty to you, and if you think about problems, conflicts or dishonesty, you attract them into your life. What happens in a given case will not usually be the precise output of a particular line of thought, but the result of the combined action of that line of thought and your general mental attitude. Thought about disease is only one of the two factors which produce bodily ailments, and it is usually the less important. The other more important factor is the storage of negative or destructive emotions. While this fact seems to be very little understood, even among students of metaphysics, it is very important. It is so important, that it is impossible to overemphasize the fact, that most bodily ailments are caused, because the patient allows destructive emotions to occupy a place in his mind. Harboring feelings of anger, resentment, jealousy, resentment, etc., is sure to damage health in one way or another. One woman said, "I have a right to be angry," meaning that she had been the victim of very unpleasant treatment. And that consequently, she possessed a kind of license or special permission to hold the feelings of anger, without its natural consequences in the body. Of course, this is absurd. There is no one to grant such permission, and if it could be done, if general laws could be set aside in special cases, we would have not a universe, but chaos. If you press the button, no matter what the motive, good or bad, to save a man's life or to murder him, the electric buzzer will go off, because that is the law of electricity. If you were to drink a deadly poison unintentionally, it would end your life, or at least severely damage your body, because such is the law. You may have mistakenly assumed that it is a harmless liquid, but that would not change anything, because the law does not take intentions into account. Similarly, having negative emotions is ordering problems, mainly physical problems, and also problems in general, regardless of any apparent justification, you may assume you have. Once, I found an old sermon delivered in London, during the French Revolution. In it, the author, who had an extremely superficial view of the gospel, said, referring to the Sermon on the Mount, "Surely it is justifiable to hate Robespierre, and to execrate the murderer of Bristol." This pronouncement perfectly exemplifies the fallacy we have been considering. To maintain hatred is, ipso facto, to be involved in certain unpleasant results. And as far as you are concerned, it will not make the slightest shade of difference, whether you apply the label, Robespierre, or Tom, or Dick, or Harry, to the emotion in question. Whether the man Robespierre was in fact a devil or an angel of light, has nothing to do with the matter. To indulge a feeling of execration of any person, independent of any question, deservedness or otherwise in the object of his condemnation, will surely bring trouble upon your own head, which will be in proportion to the intensity of the feeling you cherish, and to the number of times or minutes you devote to it. No Christian of science thinks that hatred or execration is justifiable under any circumstances, but whatever your opinion on the matter, there is no doubt of its practical consequences for you. You might swallow a dose of prussic acid in 2 gulps, and think of protecting yourself by saying, "This is for Robespierre, and this for the murderer of Bristol." You will hardly have any doubt as to who will receive the benefit of the poison. It is very significant that Jesus calls your conscience the secret place. He wishes, as always, to impress us with the truth that it is the inner that causes the outer, and not the outer that causes the condition of the inner. An external thing never causes another external thing. Cause and effect go from the inner to the outer. In theory, this all-encompassing master law is not difficult to understand, once it has been clearly stated. But in practice, it is extraordinarily difficult not to lose sight of it in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Our constitution is such that we can only devote our conscious attention to one thing at a time. And when we are not deliberately attending to the observance of this law, if the interest in what we are doing or saying monopolizes our attention, then our already formed habits of thought will surely determine the tenor of our thinking. In practice, we constantly forget the master law until we have exercised ourselves in its observance with the utmost care. In the meantime, as long as we continue to violate the law, even if we forget it, we will continue to incur punishment. It is evident then, that nothing is worthwhile, nothing is of real importance, but a change of policy in the secret place. Think about it correctly, and sooner or later, everything will be all right on the outside. If you are content with a change in outward observance, without also changing your thoughts and feelings, then you are not only wasting your time, but you can easily lull yourself into a false sense of security, and live in a fool's paradise. Likewise, you are likely to fall into the sin of hypocrisy. We must point out that for a long time, mankind has cherished the pathetic illusion that external acts, which are so easy, can substitute for an inner change of thought and feeling, which is so difficult. It is so easy to buy and wear ceremonial vestments, to repeat rote prayers at certain times, to use stereotyped forms of devotion, attend religious services at prescribed periods, and leave the heart unchanged. The phylacteries of the Pharisees, it only took a moment to fasten, but the cleansing of the heart requires hours and years of sincere and self-disciplined prayer. A distinguished Quaker said a few years ago, "In my youth, we gave up wearing the distinctive Quaker costume, and some other usages. For we found, that people who were far from being really interested in our Quaker ideals, joined us for the educational facilities, which they could obtain for their children. It was easy to dress as a friend, buy and wear a coat without buttons or collar, and interject into the conversation some grammatical peculiarity, leaving the character completely intact. Cowboys, for their part, are not the only ones who have had to face this problem. In fact, this danger was the rock on which Puritanism was finally shipwrecked. The Puritans came finally to insist on an external conformity, on all sorts of non-essential points, imposing civil and sometimes criminal penalties, for non-compliance, even in matters to which no statute could apply. It came to be understood that a certain conduct, a style of dress, the liberal use of artificial phraseology, or practices such, as foisting on children, extravagant names from the Old Testament, would constitute as many passports, for advancement in civil, ecclesiastical, and often commercial life. As if these trifles could have any spiritual value in themselves, and were not in fact the simplest way, to open an easy way for spiritual pride, and blatant hypocrisy. It is unquestionable, that the spiritualization of thought, makes that in practice what once seemed important, now turns out to be unimportant and uninteresting. It is also unquestionable that, little by little, he meets different people, reads different books, spends his time differently, and that his conversation naturally changes its quality as well. The old things have passed away, behold, I make all things new. All these things follow the change of heart, they can never precede it. Let us now see how vain is the foolish attempt to acquire popularity, or to cultivate the good opinion of other people, under the impression that such a thing can be of any real advantage to us. Those who heard the Sermon on the Mount had often seen the lowest elements among the Pharisees performing good works in the most ostentatious manner in order to gain the reputation of being exceptionally orthodox and holy. At the same time they were probably under the confused impression that they were also promoting their spiritual welfare. In this section, Jesus has analyzed and exposed this type of fallacy once and for all. He asserts that the applause that follows external acts is the only reward they bring, and that worthwhile results are only obtained in the secret place of consciousness, where if we pray scientifically to our Father in secret, He will reward us openly, with a genuine demonstration. Jesus here also emphasizes the need to keep our prayers alive. It is no use merely repeating a phrase mechanically, just like a parrot does, making vain repetitions when praying. One must be constantly feeling out, becoming receptive, not negative but receptive, to divine inspiration. There is no objection to constantly repeating a useful phrase, even without realizing it, as long as it does not become mechanical. Jesus himself repeated his words 3 times, at the time of his dire need in the garden. Matthew 26:44. If at any time you feel that you are getting bogged down in your prayers, stop, go away and do something else, and come back later with a fresh mind. God knows what you need before you ask Him. We do not have to create the good, because it already exists eternally, in the fact of God's omnipresence. However, we have to make it manifest, through our own personal realization of the truth. This text does not say that we should not pray in relation to particular needs or problems. There are those who have interpreted it to mean that we should work only for general harmony. But this is incorrect. If we work only for general harmony, the results of our work will spread over all departments of our life, and the improvement in any particular detail may be as small as insignificant. The proper thing to do would be to concentrate your prayers on that which you wish to manifest at that moment. We do not pray for a thing as an object in itself, it is true, but when we lack something, whether it is money, a house, a friend, we take care of ourselves, the soul of that feeling of lack. And once we have prayed enough, as to correct our understanding on that point, what we need will appear, as a proof that the work has been done. Satisfy the feeling of lack within you with a feeling of divine love, so that the thing that is lacking will appear in your life on its own. When saying your prayers, never be afraid to be too specific, precise and serious. Jesus himself was all that. So, pray like this. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forevermore. Amen. For if ye forgive men their trespasses, the heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. Matthew 6. This prayer, the greatest of all, we commonly call the New Father. It is in fact a superb summary of the whole teaching of Jesus Christ, in a form unequaled for its brevity and completeness. It is really nothing less than a complete outline of Christian metaphysics, and the author of this book has already treated it at considerable length, in a pamphlet entitled, The Lord's Prayer. So we do not see it necessary to cover the same ground again here. Suffice it to say that in these few verses, it defines the nature of God and man, and explains the true relation between them. It tells us what the universe really is, and provides a method of rapid spiritual development, for those who use it intelligently every day. Notice how much Jesus insists on the need to forgive, if we want to progress spiritually. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the sad-faced hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces to look like men who fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that you may not resemble men who fast, but your Father who is in secret, and your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you openly. Matthew 6. In those days, fasting was a widespread custom among the people, and Jesus takes this practice for granted. Fasting, as we understand it in scientific Christianity, is the abstention from certain thoughts, mainly negative or error, of course. Although in some cases it is necessary, if you want a demonstration, to abstain for a while, from thinking about a particular problem. There are certain problems, usually, those that have been given too much thought, that come out or are overcome only with prayer and fasting. In this case, it is better to give the problem a definite and final treatment, and then leave it alone for a while, or else give it corporeally to someone else, to handle it for you. After which, you keep your thoughts completely away from it. Physical fasting has occasionally proved helpful in overcoming a problem, especially what is called a chronic difficulty, when accompanied, of course, by spiritual treatment. This is mainly due to the high degree of concentration, which accompanies physical fasting. Notice that verse 18 is substantially a repetition of verse 6. If the Bible repeats itself in this way, it is an indication that a point of primary importance is being addressed. Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust corrupt, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust corrupts, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The light of the body is the eye, therefore, if your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. Therefore, if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Matthew 6. Having spoken of the nature of the secret place, and having given prayer or divine realization as the key to life, Jesus goes on to emphasize certain consequences, which are derived from all this, in order to show us how we must, as soon as possible, reform our whole life, according to the new basis. Now that we understand that the material plane is nothing more than the realization of a thought, we should realize the folly of collecting or attempting to collect large sums of money or goods, as well as material property, of any kind. If your consciousness is right, that is, if you rightly understand God, as the loving source of your unlimited supply, then you will always have, whatever amount of money or goods you need, wherever you are, or whatever your conditions may be. You can lack for nothing. When one truly realizes that in the divine mind, demand and supply are one, on the other hand, until you realize this, you will never really be safe from lack. You can, indeed, get a very large share of the world's goods, in the form of bank balance, stocks and bonds, real estate or whatever. But unless you have attained sufficient spiritual understanding, these assets are more likely, sooner or later, to take wing, and fly away. In reality, there is no way to have security without spiritual understanding. The safest banks can and do fail, unforeseen catastrophes occur in the stock market. Mines and oil wells give way or can be destroyed by some natural cataclysm. The opening or closing of a railroad station, or the startup of a new one elsewhere, can ruin the value of your real estate. Not to mention the unpredictable effect of unexpected political upheavals on all types of property. In short, it is a waste of time to devote too much attention to collecting material possessions, which are as vulnerable to change and chance, as they are to moth and rust, or to thieves. People who devote a reasonable part of the time and attention they spend in the pursuit of material goods, devote it to scientific prayer and meditation. But the change of consciousness that will take place would put them out of any possibility of suffering any of these dangers. If they had sufficient spiritual understanding of the offer, their investments would probably not go wrong. However, if they did not, their losses would be immediately replaced in some other way, and before they had time to suffer them. If on Monday, the bank in which your fortune was deposited would stop paying, probably before the end of the week, you would get from elsewhere an equivalent sum of money, or at least as much as you could need, if you had enough spiritual understanding. In any case, the owner of a prosperity consciousness cannot get poorer, nor can the owner of a poverty consciousness get richer permanently. In time, no one can retain what does not belong to him by right of conscience, nor be deprived of what is truly his, by the same supreme title. Therefore, you will do well not to lay up for yourself treasures on earth, but to lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, that is, the understanding of spiritual law. If you seek happiness or security in transient and immutable external things, you are not putting God first. If you put God first in your life, you will not find yourself laboring under excessive anxiety for anything, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Continuing along the same line of ideas, in greater detail, Jesus goes on to say that those who are on the new basis should be free from all sorts of little anxieties and troubling details, which continue to afflict those who are not. For example, questions of diet will resolve themselves, if one thinks correctly. An adept of the new life does not need to watch every morsel he puts in his mouth, until eating becomes a burden. He eats naturally and spontaneously, from the ordinary food that comes his way, knowing that his habitual right thinking will also take care of his diet. If he were accustomed to eating more than is good for him, the fact that he now prays every day for wisdom and guidance in general would lead him to eat less. Or if he were not eating enough, daily scientific prayer would cause him to eat more, until he reached the right amount. The same principle applies to all the details of daily life. If you pray for yourself in the right way every day, you will find that the minor things of life, gradually, will fall rightly into place by themselves, without any trouble on your part. Contrast it with the usual method of trying to do everything right, organizing separately 1,000 insignificant details, and you will appreciate how it frees you, the new spiritual basis. When your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. This is the synthesis of the whole truth. Certainly, if the eye is single, the whole body of experience will be full of light. The eye symbolizes spiritual perception. Whatever you give your attention to, that is what governs your life. Attention is the key. Your free will lies in the direction of your attention. Whatever you steadily direct your attention to, it will enter your life and dominate it. If you do not constantly direct your attention to anything in particular, and many people do not, then nothing in particular will come into your life except uncertainty and suspense. You will be like a drifting log. On the other hand, if you direct your attention to the outer world of manifestation, which in its nature is continually changing, you will be doomed to unhappiness, poverty, and ill health. On the other hand, if you direct your attention to God, if the glory of God comes first in you, and expressing His will becomes the rule of your life, then your eye is single, and your whole body or incarnation, will be full of light. No man can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will cling to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say to you, do not be anxious about your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor about your body, what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Behold the birds of the air, which neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, but the heavenly Father feeds them. Are ye not much better than they? Which of you can add 1 cubit to their stature by your thinking? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin. But I say unto you, that even Solomon, in all his glory, was not clothed like one of them. Therefore, if God so clothed the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Therefore do not be anxious to say what we shall eat, or 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 what we shall be clothed with. For the Gentiles seek all these things, for the heavenly Father knows that you have need of them all. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Matthew 6. Many Christians accepted these facts theoretically, but have been less than lukewarm when it comes to their practical application. And this hesitation has led them into the mass of difficulties, which always follow inconsistency and weakness. Those who rest entirely on the material basis have a better time in general, because at least they live according to the best they know, and play the game as they understand it. To pretend to rest sometimes on one basis and sometimes on the other, is to try to serve two masters, and this, of course, cannot be done. One cannot serve God and riches. The person is essentially spiritual, image and likeness of God, and therefore, is made for the spiritual basis, and cannot really succeed on any other. The birds of the sky and the lilies of the field provide a surprising lesson to man, in their complete adaptation to the laws of their respective planes. They fully express their true nature, knowing nothing like the worry and anxiety, which deform so many human lives. The lilies referred to are the beautiful wild poppies of the East. And anyone who has seen a field of poppies dancing and swaying in the breeze, will appreciate the sense of relaxation, freedom and joy, which Jesus had in mind, as our true birthright. Naturally, he did not mean that you, as a human being, should literally copy the life or methods of birds or flowers, for you are infinitely higher than them on the scale of creation. What it means is that you must adapt to your element, as they do to theirs. Your true element is the presence of God. Augustine said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless, until they rest in thee." As man accepts the truth that in God they live, as completely and unconditionally, as birds or flowers accept the truth of their condition, his life will take the path for which they were designed. Whoever would be so foolish as to take these beautiful similes literally, instead of spiritually, and lay down, let us suppose, in a field among the poppies, expecting God to work a spectacular miracle in his favor, would soon learn by experience that this is not the way. Possessing faculties infinitely superior to the vegetable or animal kingdoms, he will actually emulate the wisdom and glory of these, being constant and active in his own kingdom, that of prayer and meditation. The spiritual foundation does not mean to limit oneself to work as and when I wish, but to intensify the activity, but on the spiritual plane, and not on the material. Only in this way can it be said that the kingdom of heaven is sought first, and from there, all necessary things will be found. If you are very worried and bewildered or very discouraged, that is the time to lie down mentally among the poppies, and read the Bible, or pray gently but persistently, until something happens, whether it be something within you, or something in the outward outlook. To a woman in London, who seemed to have got into a hopeless tangle, which meant utter ruin, I persuaded her to lay down the whole burden mentally, and allow the worst to pass off. While she spent 2 or 3 days, browsing the Bible and praying for peace and happiness, in a week everything was magically solved, without her having taken any material action. The normal way of supplying oneself is to follow some useful business or profession, in which one feels happy and satisfied, carrying out good work, and receiving generous compensation for it. Scientific prayer will place anyone in such a position, if he does not already possess it. And then, if he prays every day as he should, understanding his true place, and claiming the opportunities of service, his real position, whatever it may be, will continually improve, as time goes on. Of course, this does not mean that one must necessarily go out of business. For example, the woman who does housework is as useful a citizen as any other in the country. And there are many people, whose private income prevents them from earning money, leading a life of great usefulness, in the development of literature and art, and in other activities. What is certain, is that no one on the spiritual basis will lead a life of leisure, regardless of the amount of money they have. Sometimes, we hear curious cases of people, who claim to be so spiritual, that they do not feel called to earn a living, but this mental attitude speaks for itself. If your understanding of metaphysics is sufficient to enable you to dispense with ordinary work, you will automatically find yourself supplied, and leading a good life. This is impossible to apply to people who are in debt or dependent on others. However, if you really want to try the experiment, to go out with the power of the word, do it, and make sure that what you do is authentic. The only thing that can make this experiment genuine, is to let it prove itself or starve. If you are secretly looking for someone else to come to the rescue, you are not really depending on the word. Every scientific Christian is entitled to reasonable prosperity, which means enough to live on, with decent comfort and reasonable security. Until you can genuinely demonstrate this, by the power of the word, you should just use your treatment, to find a suitable working position for yourself. Jesus affirms in that section, that by thought we cannot add, not 1 cubit to our height. It is one more way of stating the great truth, which he declares in so many ways, namely, that we must be born again. So long as you remain the man you are, you cannot, by the mere fact of thinking, be or do anything but what you are. Since you always do what you are, you can only get somewhere, as they say, by becoming a different man. And that you can only do, by getting some realization of God's presence. Be not therefore anxious for the morrow will take care of the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Matthew 6. Generally, in the scientific prayer we work in the present tense. The objective of scientific prayer is to adjust the conscience, and this must necessarily be done in the present. Behold, now is the accepted time, behold, now is the day of salvation. If you are presented with a problem related to your future. For example, supposing you have to take an exam in 6 months, or you have to go on a trip that you are dreading, perhaps next week. Then the right thing to do is to pray about it now, in the present time. Don't wait for the time to come, but work on it now, that is, work on your own consciousness about it, and in the present tense. The fact may be future, but having it in mind now, means that it is present in consciousness, and as the thought is present, you can and should deal with it in the present tense. Similarly, you can deal with past events, and should do so if they are still of concern, by dealing with them in the present tense, because the thought of them is present. Try to treat both past and future events as if the incident is happening right now. Remember that God is outside of what we call time, and the beautiful healing action of His holy presence is as applicable to one date as to another. Always remember, that the only thought that should concern you, is the present. The thought of yesterday or last year, does not matter now, because if you can get the present thought right, it will make everything else right. Here and now, the best way to prepare for tomorrow, is to make today's consciousness, serene and harmonious. Everything good will come after that. Never go rummaging around in your mind, looking for problems to pray about or deal with. Deal faithfully with those that come to your attention, and the hidden things will be dealt with. In this same spirit, scientific Christianity discourages too much consideration of the next plane and conditions after death. Many times, such concerns are but an escape from our reality in everyday problems, which must be faced and solved here. We must concentrate on life and not on death, acting in the right way, here and now. By what measure do you measure? Judge not, lest ye be judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with what measure you measure, you will be measured again. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, behold, there is a beam in your own eye? You hypocrite! Take the log out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly, to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Matthew 7. This section of the Sermon on the Mount consists of 5 short verses, and only about 100 words. However, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it is the most amazing document which has been presented to mankind throughout its history. These 5 verses tell us more about the nature of man and the meaning of life, the importance of conduct and the art of living, the secret of happiness and success, and the way out of trouble, the approach to God, and the emancipation of the soul and the salvation of the world, than what we have been told by all philosophers, theologians and sages together, because it explains the great law. It is far more important for a man, and still more for a child, to know the meaning of these 5 verses, than to learn anything else, which is taught in schools or colleges. No ordinary course of study contains anything. There is nothing that can be learned, in any library or laboratory, that is 1/1,000,000th part of the information contained here. If ever the fanatical saying could be justified, burn the rest of the books, for all is in this one, it would be in reference to these words. Judge not lest ye be judged, for with what judgment ye judge ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. If the common man could understand for just a moment the meaning of these words, and really believe them to be true, they would immediately revolutionize his whole life from top to bottom. They would turn his daily conduct upside down, and change him so much that, in a comparatively short space of time, his closest friends would hardly know him. Whether it is the Prime Minister in the cabinet, or the man in the street, this understanding would turn the world upside down for him, and because the thing is infectious beyond calculation, it would turn the world upside down for many. Every time, as we reread this Sermon on the Mount with a fresh mind, we are surprised to see how its most challenging statements have been quietly ignored in practice by most of the Christian world. If anyone did not know that these words are constantly heard in public and read in private by millions and millions of Christians of all kinds, he could scarcely believe it possible. For the truths which they teach seem to be the last thing which people consider for their daily conduct, and yet they express in the simple and inescapable law of life. The law of life is that, as we think, speak and act with others, others will think, speak and act with us. The conduct we give, we will inevitably receive back. Whatever we do to others, sooner or later, will be done to us by someone somewhere. Whatever good we do to others will be returned to us in equal measure, and whatever bad we do to others will also be returned. This does not mean at all that the same people to whom we treat well or badly are the ones who return the action. But what does happen is that at another time or place, often far away and long after, another who knows nothing of the previous action will give it back to us grain by grain. At every unpleasant word you say, someone will repeat it against you. The more you cheat, the more you will be cheated. For every time you deceive, you will be deceived. For every lie you tell, you will be lied to. For every time you neglect a duty, or shirk a responsibility, or misuse authority over others, then you will be doing something, for which you will inevitably have to pay, suffering similar damage yourself. With what measure ye meet, ye shall be measured. Isn't it obvious that if people realized that all this is literally true, it would have the most profound influence on their behavior? Would it not generate such an understanding that crime would be reduced, and the moral standards of all of us would be raised? People are very apt to think, especially when they have a strong temptation, that they can probably escape the law of the land, outwit the policeman, or wriggle out of the clutches of authority, in some other way. They trust that individuals will forgive them, or that they will not be able to avenge their actions, or that the matter will be forgotten at some point, or better yet, that they will never be found out. But if they understood that the law of retribution is a cosmic law, impersonal and immutable, like the law of gravity, with no regard for individuals and no respect for institutions, no rancor but no mercy, then they would think twice, before treating other people unfairly. The law of gravity never sleeps, it is never off duty or off guard, it never tires, it is not merciful or vindictive, and no one would ever think of trying to evade it, cheat it, bribe it, or intimidate it. People accept it as inevitable and inescapable, and shape their behavior accordingly. And the law of retribution is just like the law of gravity. Water finds its own level sooner or later, and our dealings with others comes back on ourselves in the end. On hearing the explanation of the law of retribution, some Christians have objected that this is Buddhism or Hinduism, and not Christianity. It is perfectly true that this law is taught by Buddhists and by Hindus, and wisely, because it is the law of nature. It is also true that the law is better understood in Eastern countries than among us, but this does not make it an Eastern possession. It simply means that the Orthodox Christian churches have largely neglected the task of clarifying to the people an important part of Christian teaching. To those who say it is anti-Christianity, I ask a question: is the Gospel of Matthew a Christian document or is it not? Was Jesus Christ a Christian or a Buddhist? The doctrine, you may like it or not, and if you want you can try to ignore it, but you cannot deny that Jesus Christ taught it, and in a direct and emphatic way, when he said, "Judge not lest ye be judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with what measure you measure, you will be measured." A beautiful description of the law has been written for the English-speaking people by Sir Edwin Arnold in The Celestial Song: "No one can be despised, he who frustrates it loses, and he who serves it gains. Hidden good he repays with peace and bliss, hidden evil with pains. With this the murderer's knife was stabbed, the unjust judge has lost his own defender, the false tongue condemns his lie. The creeping thief and the despoiler, they steal to yield. Everywhere you see and mark everything, do good, and you will have reward, do evil, the same retribution must be done, even if the Dharma takes a long time. Let us see now, that it is better not to do anything to anyone that we do not want done to us. Because that is what will happen, especially if we act wrongly towards someone who is in our power. However, it is a law that works both ways. So it is equally true that for every good deed you do, for every kind word you say, you will get in the same way, at one time or another, an equivalent. Often people complain of ingratitude, of those on whom they have conferred favors, but this complaint shows a false mental attitude, which is necessary to correct. If you feel hurt, because someone has been ungrateful for your kindness, it shows that you have been seeking gratitude, and that is a great mistake. It is our duty to help others, to the extent that we can do so wisely, this being an act of love for our fellow man. Of course, love will not seek a quid pro quo, and having done one's duty, should be its own reward. Remembering, if we want, that in some other way, the fact will surely be recognized. By asking for gratitude, you are forcing the other person to a feeling that perhaps he does not have, and probably will perceive it in his subconscious, and will strongly resent it, as such a thing is highly repugnant to human nature. Do your good deed, and then pass on, without expecting or desiring personal recognition. Isn't it a beautiful and encouraging thought, that all the prayers you have done in your life, and all the good deeds and kind words, for which you have been responsible are still with you, and that nothing can take them away from you. Indeed, our prayers, and our words and acts of kindness towards others, are the only things we keep, for everything else must disappear. The faults of thought, of word and deed, are solved and satisfied under the law. But the good continues forever, unchanged by time. Those who study scientific Christianity, and understand the power of thought, will understand that it is here, in the realm of thought, that the law finds its true application. They will see that all that matters finally, is to keep their thoughts right about other people, as well as about themselves. Right thinking about God, and right thinking about one's neighbor, and right thinking about oneself, are equally the law. Knowing that dominion lies in the secret place, it is there that they will focus their attention, by observing the commandment, judge not. In scientific Christianity, the golden rule is, think of others as you would like them to think of you. Considering the knowledge we now possess, the observance of this rule becomes a solemn duty. But more than that, it is a vital debt of honor. This debt of honor is an obligation that cannot be enforced by law, but depends on the honor and self-respect of the debtor. And in the same way, since no one can know or prove how we are thinking, we are not responsible for our thoughts before any court, but before the highest of all, the court which is never wrong, and whose sentence is never evaded. The student, having acquired an understanding of what the great law is and how it works, as so wonderfully summarized by Jesus in this section, is in a position to take the next great step. And understand how it is possible to rise above even the great law itself, in the name of the Christ. The term Christ in the Bible is not identical with Jesus the individual. It is a technical term, which can be briefly defined as the absolute spiritual truth about anything. Well, knowing this truth about any person, condition or circumstance, immediately heals that person, to the extent that such truth is realized by the thinker. This is the essence of spiritual healing. And so we see that, in the broadest sense and quite independently, of the special and unparalleled work, which Jesus did for us, it is certain that the Christ comes into the world, to redeem and save it. Whenever the Christ, that is, the true idea concerning anything, is raised in thought by any person, healing takes place. Whether physical, moral or even intellectual healing, as the case may be. Intellectual healing would be to make a dull or stupid person become bright and intelligent. People with problems in school respond as if by magic to this type of treatment. It would be necessary to claim for them the divine intelligence, and to understand that God is the soul of man. Sickness and sin, poverty and confusion, weakness of character, all disappear under the power of the healing Christ, no matter how deeply rooted the problem is. Someone's understanding of the Christ, or the spiritual truth behind the appearance, will heal them. There is no exception to this because Christ is nothing less than the direct action of God. The Spirit's own knowledge overrides all else. The higher laws of the Spirit override or supersede all the lower laws of the physical and mental planes, as we saw in the first chapter. This does not mean that the laws of the physical or mental planes are broken. It means that man, because of his essential divine being, has the power to rise above these domains, to the infinite dimension of the Spirit, where such laws no longer affect him. He has not broken their laws, but has ventured beyond them. A very inadequate simile may be quoted, in the case of the balloon which moves away from the ground, apparently in defiance of the law of gravity, as soon as the bag is inflated. In this case, it seems as if the law of gravity is broken, but of course it is not broken, but is completely fulfilled by such action. However, the normal experience of ordinary life is reversed. Now, the law of karma, which is no respecter of persons, and forgets nothing, is in reality a law, which acts only for matter and mind, not for the spirit. Here everything is perfect and eternal, and immutable good. There is no bad karma to reap there, because none can be sown. So when man, by what we call prayer, meditation or treatment, transfers his attention to the domain of the spirit, he comes to that extent, under the law of perfect good, and karma disappears. So man has the choice between karma or Christ. This is the best news that has ever come to mankind, and that is why it is called the good news or the gospel, for such is the meaning of this word. Here is man's charter of freedom, his dominion over all things, as the image and likeness of God. He can choose. He can remain in the limited region of matter and mind, in which case he is firmly bound to the wheel of karma, or he can appeal by prayer to the realm of spirit, that is, to the Christ, and be free. In the countries of the East, where karma is so well understood, they lack the Christian message of the Christ, and consequently, they are in a rather hopeless position. On the other hand, we, who correctly understand the gospel of the Christ, can be free. In other words, karma turns out to be inexorable, only as long as you do not pray. As soon as you pray, you will begin to rise above karma, that is, you will begin to erase the unpleasant consequences of past mistakes. Before any error, you must suffer the consequences, what we call being punished, or eliminate them through scientific prayer, the practice of the presence of God. You have the great choice, Christ, or karma. Does this mean that any mistake, any stupidity, even some heinous sin, can be erased from the book of life, with all the punishment or suffering, which naturally befits it? That's right, it means just that, there is no evil, which the healing Christ will not destroy. In such a way does God love the world, that he manifests his unique Christic power, so that whoever chooses him, will not perish by his own weakness or frailty, but will have eternal salvation. It goes without saying that the consequences of an error, cannot be evaded cheaply with a superficial prayer. For it is not so, it is not enough to pray superficially. But sufficient realization of God is required, to fundamentally modify the sinner's character, in order to wipe out the punishment which otherwise, must always follow sin. Once a proper prayer or treatment was made, so that the sinner becomes a new man, and does not wish to repeat the sin, he will be saved from the penalties that pursued him, since Christ is the Lord of karma. By its fruits, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot, turn and tear you to pieces. Matthew 7. Intelligence is as essential a part of the Christian message as is love. Indeed, God is love, but he is also infinite intelligence. And if these two qualities are not balanced in our life, we do not obtain wisdom, because wisdom is the perfect mixture of intelligence and love. Love without intelligence can unintentionally cause much damage. The spoiled child is a clear example. And intelligence without love can end in subtle cruelty. Any true Christian activity will express wisdom. It often happens that when people know the truth, and perhaps are freed from some oppressive difficulty, they are so happy that they go running to pour out their discovery to others, indiscriminately. And probably urge them to accept the truth as well. It is entirely understandable that this should happen, for love longs to share its good. But nevertheless, it is very unwise. The fact is that the acceptance of the truth implies, as we have already seen, the discarding of all old norms. But this can only happen, if the person is spiritually prepared for the change. When one is spiritually prepared, he will willingly accept the truth, provided it is presented to him in some way, which is attractive to him. If he is not prepared, no amount of discussion or intellectual argument will make him so. Never rely on your own judgment, to say who is ready for the truth and who is not, but rely on the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, to guide you. Most of us have had the experience, when we first became aware of the spiritual idea, and what it means, of selecting some of our friends, who we were sure would jump at it, only to find that in most cases, they refused to accept it. On the other hand, several people whom in our foolishness, we decided to consider as unspiritual, because they did not seem to be, accepted it willingly. If you pray regularly for wisdom, intelligence, and new opportunities for service, the right people will be brought to you, and you will be brought to them, and a suitable occasion will present itself to introduce the subject. If when you are in the company of someone, you are in doubt whether or not to broach the subject of truth, do not do so. Instead, pray for guidance, and leave the matter to God's action. Sometimes nothing happens, no convenient opportunity presents itself, while you are with your friend, and that means it is not the right time, and no good would have been done by speaking. Nevertheless, very often, there is an obvious opening in the conversation, after the treatment has been given, or some outside incident happens, which provides an opening to introduce the subject. And there I have seen some very surprising and pleasant awakenings happen. First of all, avoid forcing the subject of truth on the people you have to live and work with, especially in your home. It is easy to become a constant nuisance by imposing certain ideas on people who cannot appreciate them, because they are not ready. Since your household members and business associates naturally have a lot to do with you, and you with them, such a policy is likely to lead to a good deal of friction and even bad feelings. Try to realize that, in the absence of your personal awakening, they may not see things the way you do. Also, you may not be very adept at presenting your ideas in the best way. Finally, remember that those with whom you are closely associated will be watching your behavior and will be familiar with many of your faults and weaknesses. And if you speak too much and too unwisely, as far as spiritual enlightenment is concerned, they will surely judge your actions by what you have said, every chance they get. In other words, to hurry slowly is the watchword here. It will not help in any way to spread the truth if you have a reputation for being a crank or a pain in the ass. The fastest way to spread it is to be a living example of the benefits of having found the truth. Then, people will notice the change in you, and as they see your health improve and your life prosper, they will come to you on their own, begging to share your secret. They will not need to be urged to drink the waters of life. When you wish to present the truth to a particular person, or to a group of people, the proper thing to do is to prepare yourself, by daily treatment for several days, or better yet, for a week or two. It is necessary to work for intelligence, love and above all, for wisdom, which as we have seen, is the correct union of the other two. Ask God's action to make you say the right thing when the time comes, and also to endow your listener or listeners with the same qualities. Do not allow yourself to worry in the least about the outcome of the discussion, speak the truth and let it be. The results you get after a few days of spiritual preparation of this kind often surprise you. Ask and it shall be given you, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you, for every one that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. What man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Matthew 7. It is the wonderful passage in which Jesus enunciates the primary truth of the fatherhood of God. We can call this primary truth, because it is the foundation stone, on which is built the whole structure, of true religion. Before men could comprehend the meaning of the fatherhood of God, and something of what it implies, they could scarcely obtain a satisfactory religious experience. As long as men believed that there were many gods, no sound religious experience was possible, for all genuine religious experience is a search for conscious union with the One. Several gods must necessarily be gods of limitation, and as they were always and necessarily presented in conflict with each other, from such a belief, only chaotic thinking could result. Those who had overcome this idea, to arrive at the concept of the unique or true God, continued to think of him almost universally, as a kind of tyrant Eastern king or sultan. He possessed and ruled man with a rod of iron, along the same lines that one might expect a capricious human tyrant to follow. In many of the Old Testament writings, the God is a very jealous, vengeful and cruel despot. A sultan who is almost impossible to please, who is relentless in his anger, and then indiscriminate in his vengeance. Apparently, he has no more in common with mankind than men have with animals. And in fact, it is much less, as we conceive that we share many of the limitations of the lower creatures, in a common susceptibility to suffering, hunger and death. This Oriental view, Sultan of God, was actually the view held by many sincere Orthodox Christians until very recent times. One witty modern writer has compared this God to a certain English millionaire who keeps a private zoo near London as his own personal hobby. The zoo has a number of creatures which exist solely for the interest and pleasure of its owner. He visits his zoo from time to time, and acting no doubt on expert advice, asks that some animals be destroyed, that others be moved to more comfortable cages, and that others be treated in this way or another. Naturally, he has no spiritual communion with them, they are simply so many animated toys existing for his entertainment. This is by no means an exaggerated description of the ideas held by many fundamentalists. In this passage, Jesus puts the axe once and for all to the root of this horrible superstition for those who read their Bible with an open mind. He says here, definitively and clearly, that the true relationship between God and man is that of father and son. In this case, God ceases to be the distant potentate, who deals with groveling slaves, and becomes the loving Father of us, his children. It is extremely difficult to realize how far-reaching this statement is for the life of the soul. If you read and reread this section, which deals with the fatherhood of God, every day for a few weeks, you will find that it alone answers many of your religious problems. I may venture that you will be considerably surprised at the great number of perplexing questions which it will solve once and for all. Original and unique is the teaching of Jesus on the fatherhood of God. In the Old Testament, God is never addressed as Father. In the cases where reference is made to his fatherhood, he is spoken of as the Father of the nation, and not of individuals. Indeed, this was the reason why Jesus made the declaration of the fatherhood of God the opening clause of what we call the Lord's Prayer. This explains, for example, the tremendous statement in Genesis, that man is the image and likeness of God. Naturally, it is axiomatic that the offspring must be of the same nature and species as the progenitor. And so, if God and man are really father and son, man, in spite of all his present limitations, and all appearances to the contrary, must also be essentially divine, and capable of infinite growth, improvement and development, by the ascending path of divinity. That is to say, as man's true nature, his spiritual character, unfolds, that is, as he becomes more and more conscious of it, he will expand in spiritual consciousness. Until he has transcended all the limits of human imagination, onward and beyond. It is in reference to this, our glorious destiny, that as we have already seen, Jesus himself says elsewhere, quoting the most ancient scriptures, I have said that ye are gods, and ye are all sons of the Most High. Then he emphasized his point by adding significantly, and the scripture, it cannot be broken. Thus, in this passage we are freed once and for all, from the last link of the last chain, which binds us to a limited and degraded destiny. We are children of God, and as children of God, we are heirs of our Father's property, not strangers or hired servants, much less slaves. We are children of the house, and one day we will enjoy our inheritance. At present, we are full of limitations and incapacities, because spiritually, we are nothing more than minor children. Children are irresponsible, they lack wisdom and experience, and we must keep them under control, so that their mistakes do not have serious consequences. But as soon as man comes of age spiritually, then, as we have seen above, he claims his rights and gets them. The heir, while he is a child, does not differ in any way from the servant, although he is lord of all, but is under tutors and rulers. But when the fullness of time comes, he awakens the truth and obtains his spiritual coming of age, he realizes that it is the voice of God himself, which is in his heart making him cry out, Abba, Father. Then at last, he knows that he is the son of a great king, and that all that his father has, is his for the use, whether it be health, supply, opportunity, beauty, joy or otherwise, of God's thoughts. The most wicked fact of life, is the slowness of man, or rather, his reluctance to perceive his own dominion. Indeed, God has given us dominion over all things, but we shrink back like frightened children from assuming it. Although assuming it, is the only way out for us, often humanity is like a fugitive, who sits in the driver's seat of a car, which is ready to take him to safety. But he does not dare, out of nervousness, to grab the controls and start the car. He sits half frozen with terror, watching over his shoulder, wondering if his pursuers will catch up with him, and what will happen to him if they do. At any moment he could get to safety, but he won't, or he won't dare to. Jesus, who knew the human heart, as no other has known it before or since, understood our difficulty and our weakness, in this respect. And with his unparalleled magic of living words, his power to express the fundamental truth, in a way so simple, direct and pointed, that even a child could not miss it, he commands us. Ask and it shall be given you, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. It is impossible to imagine that the subject in question, could be more definitely and convincingly expressed, than in these words. There are no words in any language that could be clearer or more emphatic. And yet, for the most part, Christians silently ignore them, or else dismiss their meaning, until they are left with meaningless words. As I have already pointed out, we are bound to believe, that Jesus meant what he said, or that he did not. And since we can hardly believe that he did not, or that he could have spoken nonsense for lack of understanding, we are obliged, to accept these words as true. And indeed, where is there room for elevation? Ask and ye shall receive, is not this the Magna Carta, of personal freedom for every man, woman and child on earth? Is it not the decree of emancipation from every kind of physical, mental or spiritual bondage? What room does this leave for the so-called Christian virtue of resignation, so often preached? The fact is that resignation is not a virtue at all, instead, resignation is a sin. That which we commonly dignify with the beautiful name of resignation is in reality an unhealthy mixture of cowardice and laziness. We do not have to resign ourselves to disharmony of any kind, because disharmony cannot be God's will. It is impossible to accept with resignation bad health, poverty, sin, struggle, infidelity, or remorse. On the other hand, we have no right to accept anything less than freedom, harmony and joy, because only with these things we glorify God, and express will, which is our reason for being. Out of loyalty to God, it is our most sacred duty, to refuse to accept anything less, than happiness and total success. For we will not be fulfilling, the desires and instructions of Jesus, if we accept anything less. We must mourn, meditate and reorganize our lives, according to his teachings continuously and tirelessly, until we reach our goal. The proof that this achievement, our victory over every negative condition, is not merely possible, but is definitely promised to us, is found in these glorious words. The teaching of freedom to mankind, ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Therefore, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Matthew 7. This is the sublime precept, which we call the Golden Rule. In this case, Jesus reiterates the great law in a concise summary. This repetition follows his marvelous declaration of the fatherhood of God. The underlying explanation, the existence of the great law, is the metaphysical fact, that we are all fundamentally one, all parts of the great mind. As we are all ultimately one, to hurt another is really to hurt oneself, and to help another, is really to help oneself. The fatherhood of God, compels us to accept the brotherhood of man, and spiritually, brotherhood is unity. The understanding of this great truth includes in itself all other religious knowledge, and it is in the ancient technology, the law and the prophets. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and the way that leadeth to destruction, and there are many that go in thereat. For strait is the gate, and narrow is the way that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Matthew 7. There is only one way that man can follow under the sun, to reach harmony. That is, health, prosperity, peace of mind and salvation, in the true sense of the word, which is to make a radical and permanent change, to improve their own consciousness. It is the only way, there is no other. For countless generations, humanity has tried to achieve its own good, in every conceivable way. Innumerable schemes have been designed to achieve happiness by making changes of some kind in the external conditions of man, leaving the quality of his mentality intact. But the result has always been the same, failure. We are now in a position to understand why this should be so. That it is because the very nature of our being is such that only by a change of consciousness can external conditions be really altered. This alteration of consciousness is the narrow gate of which Jesus speaks here, and as he says, it is comparatively small, the number of those who find it. At present, that number is increasing with great rapidity, though in fact, it is still comparatively small. But at the time Jesus spoke, it was much smaller still. This concept that what matters is one's own consciousness, because your own concept is what you see, Jesus calls it the way of life. And for him, all other doctrines are nothing but a wide road to destruction or disappointment. So why is man so apparently reluctant to try to change his consciousness? Why does he seem to prefer to try almost any other method, no matter how arduous or even far-fetched? Throughout history, every other conceivable way has been tried to bring about the salvation of mankind, and of course, they have all failed. And yet, man will seldom attempt the narrow way, until he is pushed to it individually, by irresistible pressure. This is because, as we have already seen, the change of consciousness is really very hard work, requiring constant and unceasing vigilance, and a breaking of mental habits, which is sure to be very troublesome for a time. As man by nature is lazy, he tends always to take the line of least resistance, and therefore, in this as in other minor matters, only comes to the basic principles, when he is forced to do so. Nevertheless, the path of life, the narrow gate, is worth far more than any trouble or effort it may require. The rewards on this path are not temporary, but permanent. Every mile gained is gained for eternity. In reality, the change of consciousness is the only thing that is really worth doing. A comparison from everyday life will help illustrate this point. Let's say a man manages to remove a stain from his coat. That action will benefit him as long as the garment is in use, say a few months. On the other hand, suppose he develops a bodily function, for example, his respiratory capacity, by suitable physical exercises. The improvement obtained in this case will accompany you for the rest of your physical life, perhaps 50 or 70 years. And it is for this reason alone, much more important. If there is a qualitative change in your consciousness, what happens with prayer or treatment? Then, not only do you feel the effect of that change, in all phases and departments of your life, but it accompanies you for all eternity, for you will never lose it. Thieves cannot break in and steal it. As soon as you gain spiritual consciousness, you will find that all things, in fact, work together for the good of those who love the good. You will experience perfect health, abundant prosperity, and complete and total happiness. Your health will be so good that the mere fact of living will in itself be an inexpressible joy. Your body, which will no longer be the burden to which so many people drag themselves, will be as if it were shod in winged shoes. Your prosperity will be such that you will not need to think about finances, you will always have all the supply you need to carry out any of your plans. The world will be full of charming people, who will be ready to help you in everything. Others will come into your life, just to do good. You will find yourself busy with the most delightful and interesting activities. All your energies and all your faculties will find full expression. And ultimately, you will develop the fully integrated and fully expressed personality that modern psychology dreams of. Whoever has not glimpsed the secret of Christ's message may regard all this as nothing more than a beautiful vision, too good to be true. But it is precisely the essence of Christ's message that nothing is too good to be true, because the love and power of God are eternally true. It is precisely this belief that complete harmony is too good to be true that prevents us from attaining it. As mental beings, we make the laws under which we live, and we have to live under the laws we make. A tragic mistake, which Orthodox religious people often make, is to suppose that God's will for them is meant to do something very dull and unattractive. Consciously or not, they regard God as a harsh taskmaster, or a stern puritanical father. Very often, their prayers are practically reduced to something like this: "Please God, give me such and such a blessing that I so much need, but I suppose you will not do it, because you will think it is not good for me." Needless to say, a prayer of this kind is answered as it is answered in all prayers, according to the faith of the subject. That is to say, the blessing is not granted. In reality, God's will for us means greater freedom, greater self-expression, a broader, newer and brighter experience. Better health, greater prosperity, greater opportunity for service to others, and a more abundant life. If you are sick, in poverty, or are forced to do work you dislike, if you are lonely, or if you have to mix with people you dislike, you can be sure you are not expressing God's will. And as long as you are not expressing His will, it is natural that you will experience disharmony. It is equally true that when you express His will, harmony will come. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves, and by their fruits you shall know them. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? Every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a corrupt tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore by their fruits ye shall know them. Matthew 7. Is there any infallible means, by which man can discover the truth about God, about life, and about himself? Is there any way in which he can discern for himself, which is true religion and which is not? Which are the genuine churches, and which are the false ones? Which books or teachers teach the truth, and which spread error? How many honest seekers after truth, confused and troubled by the babble of conflicting theologies and contending sects, have longed with all their hearts for some simple test, by which the honest seeker might discover for himself what the truth really is? Is there a single sincere Christian who would not strive to follow the desires of Jesus Christ, if he could find out what they are? All kinds of people and churches tell you that they are the only ones who represent the true teaching. And yet, they all disagree among themselves on vital points, both of theory and practice, and every one of them is full of inconsistencies. If man were really left, without a simple practical test of religious truth, he would undoubtedly find himself in a sad plight. But fortunately, this is not the case. Jesus, the most profound, but at the same time, the most simple and practical teacher the world has ever known, has provided for this need, and has given us a test of truth, totally simple and universally applicable. It is a test which any man or woman of any kind, anywhere, can easily apply. It is as simple and straightforward as the acid test for gold. The simple question is, does it work? This test is so amazingly simple that most intelligent people have overlooked it, as if it were not worth considering. Forgetting that all the great elementary things in life are really simple. A true story always turns out to be consistent when thoroughly sifted, while the most plausible lie crumbles somewhere, if investigated enough. Truth heals the body, purifies the soul, reforms the sinner and solves difficulties, appeases strife. From this it follows that, according to Jesus, the teaching that is true will automatically prove itself by practical demonstration. They will cast out demons, speak in new tongues, take up serpents, drink with impunity any deadly thing, lay hands on the sick, and heal them. On the contrary, false teaching, however attractive it may present itself, however much prestige may be attached to it, it will not do all or any of these things, and not being equal to the test, it must be condemned. Its sponsors are false prophets, clothed in the sheepskin of true religion. But though as a rule, they are perfectly sincere in their claims and pretensions, yet they stand between the seeker and saving truth. And they are therefore, in spite of their good intentions, spiritual wolves. By their fruits ye shall know them. And since we clearly understand that a successful demonstration is the proof, we have no more excuse to stray from the path. Our progress on the path may be, for one reason or another, comparatively slow. But at least, we will be able to stay on the path. We will always know if we have left the path, because the manifestations will cease. For most people, it is especially difficult to manifest in certain directions, while they have little difficulty in others. This is to be expected, and it just means that you have to work harder in some directions than in others. However, if you do not get real demonstrations in any direction, it means that you have left the path, and are no longer praying correctly. You must return immediately, maintaining that divine intelligence is inspiring you, and that you are expressing the truth. If you do this, you will not suffer any harm, even if the unproductive period seems to last a long time. On the other hand, if you behave like the Pharisees, and instead of frankly admitting your error, you proceed to indulge in self-justification, then you will indeed have a bad time. And if like some misguided, you say, I don't do demonstrations, but I don't wish to, because I am too spiritual, I am above demonstrations, I am too advanced for this sort of thing. Or maybe, I do demonstrations, in ways that you can't see. Then, you are not only talking nonsense, but you are doing something very much like, blaspheming against divine wisdom itself. And what is this, if not sin against the Spirit? The real reason for desiring demonstrations, is that they are the proof of understanding. Understanding without demonstration, does not exist. As within, so without, as without, so within. If you want to know how you are really in the spiritual, look around you, starting with the body. In the soul there can be nothing, which does not sooner or later prove itself on the outside, and there can be nothing on the outside, which does not find some correspondence on the inside. Whether it be the proof of your own soul, the proof of a teacher, or the proof of a book or a church. That test is always simple, direct and infallible. Does it work? What are the fruits? By their fruits ye shall know them. For not everyone who says to me, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, and in your name, have we cast out demons, and have done many wonderful works? And then I will say to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. Matthew 7. Mankind is slow to realize, that there is simply no way to be saved, except by changing the conscience, which means, trying to do the will of God, consistently in every department of life. Sometimes, and in some things, we are all willing to do His will, but until there is complete alignment, in both big and small things, there can be no complete demonstration. As soon as we allow anything secondary, to come between us and the primary, there is no complete salvation, no home for the soul, in which dwells the shadow of a falsehood. Said George Meredith, it is an extraordinarily subtle danger, no sooner have we met and mastered it in one direction, than it seems to attack us in another. It requires unceasing vigilance, and almost unwavering courage. We must not allow any consideration, any institution, any organization, any book, any man or woman, to come between us, and our direct pursuit of God. If we rely on anything, other than our own understanding of the truth, our work will cease to be fruitful. If we rely unduly on anyone else, a particular teacher or healer, for example, it is certain to fail us, probably through no fault of our own. He may not be available to us when we need him most, or for some other reason, he will not be available when we need him. This principle applies also when people allow themselves to become slaves to special conditions. Many hesitate to free themselves from an Orthodox church because of the sentimentality of breaking a family tradition. However, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Again, many people seem to find it possible to muster enough energy and courage to break away from the Orthodox Church, only to settle down again, almost as inert, in one of the more liberal churches. Like some spiritual center or organization, where they seem to fall asleep again, under the impression that they have now finally discovered the truth, and need not take any more trouble. As if this is not exactly the same old mistake made by the pioneers and founders of all the Orthodox churches, all of which started originally as reforming heresies. What do you get out of one organization if you are just going to surrender your newfound freedom to another? Other people have developed a devotion to some independent teacher, which has caused them to yield for their judgment to his. Others also have some favorite textbook, which they consider infallible. But the only infallible thing known to man is the simple test of truth given to us by Jesus: by their fruits ye shall know them. You should gladly avail yourself of useful teachings, wherever you get them. Go to churches or meetings that help you, listen to speakers and read books that inspire you to find yourself, but do not abandon to anyone your own spiritual judgment. Thank those who have helped you, and acknowledge the good you have received. But always be ready to move on to the next step. Keep in mind that the truth of being is concerned with the infinite, the impersonal principle of life, and does not lend itself to exploitation by particular personalities or organizations. You owe not an atom of allegiance to anyone, or anything in the universe, except to your own indwelling Christ, your own spiritual integrity. If merely enrolling in the membership of some organized body were a guarantee of spiritual understanding, our salvation would be a much simpler matter than it is. Unfortunately, the problem is much more complicated. Centers, churches, schools, all serve a useful purpose by providing the physical framework for the dissemination of correct knowledge through lectures, books, etc. But the real work must be done in the individual consciousness. To claim more than this for external things is to re-establish superstition. If when the time of trial comes, we try to rely on having been members of a church, on devotion to the personality of a teacher, or on a mere knowledge of a textbook, then the voice of truth will proclaim that it never knew us. Since human life and character have so many facets, the Bible approaches each problem from several different angles. This section of the sermon also teaches another very important lesson, that the only way to accomplish anything is by practicing the presence of God. This is the only way in which permanent results can be obtained. Temporary alterations in conditions may be brought about by means of willpower. But they are only temporary, and sooner or later, whatever seems to have been accomplished in this way will disappear again, leaving everything worse than it was before. It is possible, for example, that a great fortune is built up by willpower alone, but the money thus acquired, sooner or later takes wings, and flies away again, leaving the victim poorer than ever. Such a person does not know the truth of the being, and therefore, it does not know him, and cannot help him. Dramatically expressed in the Eastern way, this becomes, I never knew you, depart from me, you who work iniquity. Once a person has made a mistake like this, what he must do is to stop trying to work without God, whereupon his mistake will be forgiven, as will all mistakes, as soon as we repent of it. Next, you must begin immediately to work for supply on the spiritual basis, claiming God as your source, and recognizing God's bounty as your own. Thus you will build a true prosperity consciousness, and when this is done, you can never become impoverished. Therefore, whoever hears these words and puts them into practice, I will compare him to a wise man, who built his house upon a rock. And the rain came down, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, but it did not fall, because it was founded upon a rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Matthew 7. He concludes the sermon with one of those illustrations that for its simplicity, directness, and graphic power, have no parallel outside the teaching of Jesus. No one who has read this parable of the two houses will ever forget it. It warns us once again of the vanity of precepts without practice, of the deadly danger of those who know the truth without honestly trying to put it into practice. One might almost say, it is better never to have heard of the truth, than to know it, and not try to live it. For the human soul, one of the most ancient and important symbols, is that of a building, sometimes a dwelling and sometimes a temple, whose construction is in charge of man. The man-builder constitutes a character as familiar in the occult tradition as the shepherd man, the fisherman man or the king man, as we found in a previous section. The first step which the builder of a house must take is to choose a solid foundation, for without it, however skillfully and conscientiously the building may be constructed, it will collapse at the first serious storm that arises. We must remember that Jesus was brought up in the house and workshop of a carpenter, who at that time and place was also a builder, as he still often is, in remote country places among us. So this illustration immediately came to mind. In the shifting sands of the desert, it is impossible to build anything at all, so their people have to dwell in tents. If the Oriental wants to build a permanent structure, he will look for a rock and build on it. Now, the rock is one of the biblical terms for the Christ, and the implication is very obvious. The truth of the Christ is the only foundation upon which we can build the temple of the regenerated soul. Surely, it is the only thing in existence that is absolutely true, that never varies, that never changes, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Resting on this foundation, we will remain secure when the winds, the rains and floods of error, fear and doubts hit us, and they will never do so with such force, because we are founded on the rock. However, to the extent that we depend on something less than the rock, on willpower, on supposed material security, on the goodwill of others, or on our own personal resources. In short, on anything less than God, we are building on sand, and great will be our fall. And it came to pass that when Jesus finished these words, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Matthew 7. From this final paragraph, we are simply told that people are astonished at his doctrine. This is always the case. The doctrine of Jesus Christ is totally revolutionary. It reverses all norms and methods, not only of the world, but also of all conventional or orthodox religion. For it directs our gaze from the outside to the inside, and from man and his works to God. He taught as one who has authority, and not as the scribes. The best thing about the spiritual foundation is that you begin to know. When you have obtained the smallest true demonstration, through scientific prayer, you will have experienced something that never leaves you. You possess the testimony of truth within yourself, you no longer depend on someone else's word, you know it for yourself, and this is the only authority worth having. Jesus had this authority, and he demonstrated it by doing works. In the next chapter of Matthew, we learn that immediately after the last discourse of that Sermon on the Mount, in fact, on his way back to the city, he instantly cured.
As you conclude this transformative journey through the divine treasure, may the wisdom of Emmet Fox continue to resonate within your heart and guide your path. Remember, the treasure you seek lies not in distant lands, but within the depths of your own being. May you carry forth the light you have discovered here and shine it brightly upon the world. Farewell, and may your life be forever enriched by the divine treasure within.